So I was going to give a little bit go over it and okay.
Started too soon.
Oh, sure.
I'm going to give you this.
So I stand here or
If you could, that'd be
okay,
great.
sure.
Just want to get the sound turned up.
I can see.
Okay.
Thank you. Here you go.
Okay, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying, so I'm going to talk about the first chapter of this book. And also it's probably helpful because maybe his style is a little hard to get. So but also because he tells some very deep truth. Even if we did get everything, it's good to, I guess, rehear them. So yeah, and then before I start, so this is a book by Erik Varden. Maybe you've heard of him. He's quite a I don't know how to say it. It's like quite a character. Doesn't say that, right? But so actually, I had the grace of meeting him in this spring. He went to Notre Dame. Was giving a talk there, and then we had lunch together, and he immediately strikes you as, sometimes you meet these people and you just like they're just very deep on many levels, right? Like humanly, but just spiritually. He has like a special aura, right? But very, very simple, which is all the more striking, right? So he would always be very interested in what you about you and tell me about you, and yeah. So Erik Varden, he grew up in South Norway in a Protestant family, but they were not believers. And in the introduction, he tells a little bit of his story there, and then how he converts, right? Like he was always a very sensitive soul, I guess, right? He loved literature and just a very deep thinker, I guess. But what drew him into the faith, or initially, was through music. So he recounts the story in the introduction, if you want to read that, and through a symphony of Mahler, and the second, which is the Resurrection Symphony, which is an incredible piece, just by the way. And so how hearing that, somehow he knew, well, there must be more, right? And there he starts to believe in God. He doesn't become Catholic then, but that takes longer. And then, well, he goes to Cambridge later. He does his PhD there, and then he becomes a Trappist monk, right? And so he goes into and now, yeah, he was a Trappist monk, and then until I think last year or 2 years ago, Pope Francis asked him to be that he became the abbot of that Trappist monastery, and then 2 years ago, or maybe last year, he became bishop of one of the I forget how many dioceses there are in Norway, but there are not too many, and so he's the bishop there. And yeah, and just like he has several books, and just, yeah, a very inspiring figure. Okay, but so the book is called The Shattering of Loneliness, and we read the first chapter. So I'm going to talk a little bit what he tells in the first chapter, and that so it's all about remembering and memory in general, the book, and all the introduction he goes into that. And so the first chapter is called Remember You Are Dust, and he starts off saying, speaking about, well, as a monk, right? You have to go back to like maybe the rule of monastic life, right? It's not the first one, but maybe the most important one is of Saint Benedict, right, of Norcia, in the 6th century, right? Saint Benedict. And so he says there that all the life of the monk should be characterized by a Lenten character, right? And then Bishop Varden, he starts reflecting about it, right? What does that mean? And then yes, Lenten character. I mean, Lent is a moment when we do a penance, right? For our sins, and we try to convert, right? But then also Bishop Varden says, that Lent is also characterized intrinsically by that tension towards Easter, right? So you have both elements there, right? And he says actually all the rule which Benedict set up, the monastic life, is characterized by that continual tension towards Easter, right? And especially in the liturgy, right? Sunday as the day of the resurrection, so the mini Easter, we could say. All the rhythm of the monk is characterized by the rhythm of like from Sunday to Sunday, right? And then the liturgy of the hours, that they the constant reminder of the Easter joy, right? But then, so remember you are dust. Where do we hear that, right? Especially, well, Ash Wednesday, right? I mean, it's like in Genesis, but then on Ash Wednesday, right, when the priest gives us the cross of with ashes, that's what he says, right? Remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return, right? And then Bishop Varden, he reflects like actually, because if you think back in the Genesis story, that's what God tells Adam, right? After he sinned and he falls, well, God says you will be toiling, right, and by the sweat of your brow and so on, and then also and remember your dust, and to dust you shall return, right? And Bishop Varden says, like, oftentimes it is called the curse of God, but it's actually not a curse, right? It's just a statement of fact, right? And God made Adam out of the clay, out of the dust, right? And he formed him, and then blew his breath into him to give him life, right? And that's actually also what etymologically Adam means, right? It comes from Hebrew, which actually means Adamus. I'm not very good at Hebrew, but like it's very close to the word of earth for in Hebrew, right? And so it's actually basically means man of dust, right? And that is, Bishop Varden says, it's like the first step we have to take, right? Like to see who we are, right? And oftentimes we have all these pretensions, right? And we have this image of ourselves, and which we maybe want to live up to, or what we desire, and but we're not living in truth, right? And the gospel has to start from the truth, right? So humility is just knowing our truth, right? And that is the start of conversion, right? And I mean, all the spiritual masters always say, right, like the worst sin, right? The root of all sins is pride, right? And the pride is when you think in the end you think you are God, right? And that is really, I mean, it is ridiculous, but we, to one extent or to other, think that or live that way, right? And humility is remembering, no, we are dust, right? But at the same time, Bishop Varden says that actually is it gives us a new security, right? If we don't feel maybe that weight of our image, right? But actually, when we live in truth, right, and we know, yes, we are just dust, let's say, and in English you say that, right? And it's beautiful, like it grounds you, right, and it gives you also in the end a security, right? But so as Saint Benedict says, right, the tension, yes, we are dust, but we're also called for more, right? For glory, right? So that is the Christian life, is that living in that tension, right, of Adam, and knowing, yeah, we are just dust in a certain sense, but also God is calling us to his life, to eternal life, right? To be with him, right? And to feel that tension, right? That is the Christian life. And then he uses the image of the ladder of Joseph in the Old Testament, right? The patriarch who in a dream sees the ladder that goes to heaven and the angels go up and down, right? And Bishop Varden says like that is basically what humility, like it has to be firmly grounded on the floor, right? On the ground, on the earth. But then from there, it can go up all the way to heaven, right? But the foundation has to be laid there. And that's actually also what in the prayer of Ash Wednesday, what the priest, when he blesses the ashes, that's what he says. He says, it's very striking. He says, God will stoop down, drawn by our humility, right? And in a certain sense, if we humble ourselves, God cannot but stoop down and try to lift us up, right? In a certain sense, we're recreating that the first moment when God stooped down to take the clay and breathe his breath into Adam. When he sees us humble again, and that's when the prayer says that he stoops down, right, to raise us up, right? And so we, in a certain sense, conquer God's love by our humility. And why is that? Because like in the end, God is the one who's the humble one, right? Like who is Jesus? He's the one who stoops down, right? So in a certain sense, we're imitating him there, right? By doing that. And then let me skip maybe a little bit. He goes, Bishop Varden does, and says, yeah, humility is a slow process, right? To conquer, let's say, that virtue, right? All our life, and it is hard, right? And then he gives these images and stories, and he says it's an incredibly heroic virtue, actually, right? It oftentimes is portrayed as, if you think of like Nietzsche and all these people, right? That was the one virtue that he hated Christianity because of humility, right? And he says like that's a virtue of losers, right? And he says like who is the humble? The ones that can't achieve anything, they start portraying, oh yeah, we're actually the good ones, and because we're humble, right? And so that was a reading of them. And also in the pagan world, humility was not a virtue, right? It was like you had to show off, right? But Bishop Varden, he shows like how heroic it is to live in humility, right? And for that, he gives some striking examples also of, okay, humility, as we said, is embracing our radical poverty, right? Of like who we are, right? And then also knowing that our nature by itself is incomplete, right? We have all these desires, and without God, like we cannot fulfill them, right? And then so he gives these examples, of striking examples of especially Stur Dagerman. I don't know how you pronounce him. He was a poet of 20th century, also from Norway, I think, or Sweden. Now I'm getting that confused. But yeah, so he was oftentimes portrayed as an existentialist, right? If you think of Camus and Sartre, so these definitely not religious figures, but who talk about human existence, right? Day-to-day life, but in a very real way. Like they were very keen and very good at portraying just human life. But in the end, it's all meaningless, right? Because there is no transcendence. It's all absurd, right? All our lives we're living and striving to do something, but the end, there's just a void, right? And so Bishop Varden uses that example of that poet, how he was able to see that we are just dust, right? Like this poet, right? Who unfortunately, by like he at the end, by when he was 31 years old, he committed suicide also because he did not, well, he could not bear that tension, right? Of just feeling all those desires, but like for him, life did not have any meaning. But Bishop Barton says, like, in him, he discovered a brother, actually, right? Because as he says, like, so many times, like, he was facing that hard truth, let's say, that we are actually just us, right? And how, yeah, he says, like, here I can see much more, brother, than in often like your oftentimes what is portrayed as human life in, I don't know, in media or in the newspaper, and which is much more empty, right? Than there. But in the end, the Christian way of humility again is by that tension, right? Because like just humility or without any transcendence, well, leads you to despair, right? But also Bishop Warren says, like, but those examples also help us, because like sometimes we Christians, and he ends with this, and it's very like it stirs you. It's like sometimes we say, like, yeah, death is no more, right? And Jesus already conquered everything. And so these people, like this poet, right, who see the existential threat and the weight of human existence, hearing those Christian messages just said like that, right? And well, they say, like, well, they don't take life seriously, right? So those poets, right, can help us again to find that that truth, right? And to be to have empathy, right, for human suffering, for the difficulties that we see around us. And yeah, and then maybe a final so that is basically what is there in the chapter. I mean, just like the highlights that I took out from there. There's much more, so if you have a chance, you're very welcome to read it. It's but I also thought, just a final thought, where he talks about like how heroic it is to conquer humility, right? It's like all our lives, but how do you, like, how can you conquer? Like, it is a strange virtue, right? And because if you say, I'm working on being humble, that kind of like that doesn't go well, right? It's like it should probably be exactly the other way around, right? So, but how can you work on being humble, right? Or how can you grow in humility? And so in the end, it is, well, it's looking at Jesus, right? So he is the one who is the humble one, right? And if I see him there on the cross, right? If I see him, how he stoops down in the Eucharist to be with me, right? If I see him, as Augustine says, like there in front of my feet, right? I'm trying to um yeah, move my heart, right? Then I maybe feel a little crack in my heart, right? Of pride. And then I can say, well, if you, the Almighty One, right, who is everything, who actually is the one who is up there, and come down to move me and draw my love, well then, how can I not be thankful and try to imitate you in that? Thank you.
Question, Father?
Oh yeah, of course.
I guess I'd like you to just maybe speak from your pastor's heart about that that humility with transcendence, takes us to God like that ladder. That in the remember, it's like remembering two things, remembering my, I am dust, but also remembering God loved dust.
Yeah.
And I guess, when I see myself as dust, I can think, oh, my pride, I don't want to see that part of me. And so I guess if you could just talk about how you see God, I don't know, help us holding that tension, like you said, look at Christ.
Yeah.
And, just the heart of that helps us remember. It's, I think Faustina said in her diary, of two eyes, one has to remember that we're dust and one has to remember to look on Christ. And we often fail to hold the whole picture because of our fallen nature and our humanness.
Yeah.
And then we can't hold the tension. So
Yeah.
any tips on, I guess, holding the tension? How to be there and holding the tension.
Right. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, it's yeah, that's a good question. So I don't, I don't have the answer, but it's like also what I thought is, he goes into that actually dust, well, he goes into the Hebrew, and so it's actually the fertile ground, right, where the plants take their, it's more like soil really, right? So it's that type of dust, right? Also, it's not just so it's living in the truth, right? Which again has us grounded, but it's not like this big, it's not mud, right? In that sense, right? It's like it's fertile soil, which then in the hands of God can give fruit, right? So I would say it's, yeah, that's a little bit of like the thoughts that come to my mind now there. But yeah, in the end, I mean, it definitely is. Yeah, looking at Christ. I mean, that is because, and Christ will, like as today in the gospel, right? He has these two voices, right? He knows when we need maybe to look more into the harsh truth, maybe, but then he also knows when and so he will lead us also there, I guess, every soul in their spiritual life, their moments, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I thought it was a hard move.
Mm-hmm.
On the part,
On the sorry?
suicidal.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yes.
But
Mm.
going back to what you were saying, Teresa, one of the things that I forgot about when you were talking, what I marked here was when I was thinking about how heavy that was and the fact that we're just dust. I loved what he said, the difference is the created versus the uncreated.
Oh.
And where he talks about how God is the uncreated, we're the created.
Yeah.
So as us being dust,
Yeah.
I just envision looking up, like he's uncreated, he created me.
Mm.
And it's that hierarchy of him reaching down.
Mm.
Because I could never be uncreated.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore I must be something.
Mm-hmm.
And but it was kind of going back to that balancing when I was trying to find that same spot. Like how do I do that?
Yeah, that's a great insight. Yeah. Of living. I mean, we know who we are as when we face God, right? When we see him as the one who created us, right? And who is the creator, the only one. And then we know our truth, right? And we forget when we just look, like, I mean, sin is also in Latin, it's like when we just look inside, right? We look to ourselves and we forget to look around us and look up, right? So when we know our place, right, is when we, well, in the end, we are face to face with God, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Or if anybody else has any other like part which like especially struck them, you're welcome to share that. But no.
I have one thought.
Yeah.
my spiritual director told me to put down and figure out what my desire was and write it in a journal every day before my meditation. And she said, you go into the meditation looking for your desire. So if our desire was to see how we could be hidden and yet beautiful, or how we could be dust and yet more than dust, if we could figure out a way that would make sense to us to put that, and then go into your daily meditation and try to find that, and Jesus will show us.
And just one other thought, that kind of leads into my point, is the subtitle is on Christian remembrance. I wonder if you could just talk about, why we forget we're dust and we begin to think that we're, God's gift to the world or something. I mean,
Right.
it's like we forget.
Yeah.
Just how
Yeah.
we forget so much of
We do.
who God is, and I'm not him,
Yes.
that just we don't remember
Right.
that. I don't have any thoughts about
Yeah.
remembering. But
Right.
the subtitle is that we forget. We have this loneliness because we're not rightly attached to God. So when we remember,
Yeah.
really, I think that the book is about remembering who we are.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 Maybe a thought with that is like the Bible is also all like memory is very important, right? There's when the Israelites go cross the Jordan, right? They have to take 12 stones, and then like all those like to remember again, right? What the Lord did with them, the Paschal feast, like every year, right? Remember you were in Egypt, so it's and also in our lives, right? I mean, oftentimes like we live real miracles. So in that moment, we know this was a miracle. I mean, God just touched me. Like this is. But then maybe years like I totally forget, right? Or like and that's why it's like why don't write them down, or like every once in a while, like also one what maybe does the retreat, like also remember like my own life, like what was the story of God in my life, like what he did with me, like it is a very important like Christian virtue of remembering who we are, what God did in our lives. And it's very easy I guess in our fallen human nature to just live very superficially and live day to day and in the future.
I didn't put that together, that living, when we don't remember, we live superficially. I
Mm.
guess I didn't put those
Mm.
two connections, that when we forget God, we live superficially.
Yeah.
The way you said that.
Right. Somehow I think, at least for me, memory has an allusion to like depth, right? Like where you have just a person of many memories, and like he can just draw out from there, and like and somebody who like somebody who's superficial is like just from fleeing from one thing to the other. Like that's why I connected them.
Well, that connects to what Steve said about knowledge of the body. We need to remember our identity, who we are. We've forgotten that. So it connects to that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I was really struck. I feel like we talked about this last year, and I don't remember if you mentioned it or
Father Russ.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But like when he was talking about stooping down, weren't they talking about how God, like, he bowed low to us? It was like the same connection.
Yes.
And I don't know, it really kind of spoke to my heart so much.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I guess it's like just that he cares that. I don't know. Really powerful.
It is. Yeah, actually reading it, I also had to think about that. Like it's especially on Augustine, right, who is like very much about humility and so on. But like God as the humble one, right? As the so the idea at the end is actually it's an Augustine idea, right? We can only conquer our pride by looking at him who is the humble one, right? And he's like basically like our right the line of Augustine, like our heart is restless until it rests in you, or it's like I've been looking around all but you were always there, right? And it's like always there at my feet basically, and I was looking at you, I don't know, searching for in many places, right? But actually, yeah, and that is very powerful, right? When one yeah. Thank you. Sure. Yeah. Oh, it just
Well, I guess the humility's already come alive for me in the incarnation.
Yeah, the incarnation.
Incarnation. When Jesus said, Father, I will go.
Yeah.
And so it means to me two things. It means personal humility. That is humanity's humility. And that's where we're not, well, none of us have gotten to either one. But that is where we see the world today. And when you don't accept that God loves us that much and that way, we see what he does.
Yeah.
In the way right now the world is in great many ways and has rejected the existence of God, or his love for us, or his activity in our lives.
Right.
So I guess that's when it comes on for me. It's that know that it took on flesh.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Father's going to start hearing confessions, and you kind of remember where you were on the list. And I had a dear soul, sister in Christ, who was willing to give a little personal witness about reading the chapter and remembering God, who God is, and remembering our being dust before him, but what God does with dust. So I'd like Diana to come up and share a little bit, just her personal encounter with Christ through our readings. Thank you.
I'm seeing my face when I'm looking at this. That's really unnerving. Okay. So, anyway, I'm Diana Pratt, as you guys, most of you know. So I'm also going to be talking about chapter 1 in the Shattering of Loneliness. Remember that you are dust. I feel like it's kind of a lot of what of my personal points are ones that have already been shared. But anyway, and if this sounds like stream of consciousness coming from me, that's just my brain. Anyways, my first thoughts, we went to West Virginia last weekend, my husband and I, and he has family from West Virginia. And, we've been sort of rediscovering our West Virginia roots. We would say to each other, oh, our West Virginia roots are showing. When, the kids were little, we'd go to bed and we never got around to putting away all their toys in the yard, and it was all chaotic looking. We'd say our West Virginia roots are showing. And it was really his West Virginia roots, because I am not from West Virginia, and neither is my family. But anyway, it kind of ties in with this chapter. I thought, like, this roots, remember that you are dust. And there's just been this explosion of like ancestry.com and all those other websites. And I think it points to our deep-seated desire to remember our roots, or to find out what our roots are. We have a need to know who we are and where we came from and where we're going. But often, like we've just been talking about, we forget who we are, and we forget who we are. So, anyway, I'm just going to proceed through the chapter and talk about a couple parts that resonated with me. And of course, one of the main themes that Father's talked about, and we've all talked about here tonight already, is humility. And just saying that I used to have a very skewed understanding of humility. And, now I'm going to brag about how humble I am, Like many, I used to think that humility was making self-deprecating remarks. Oh, it was nothing. Oh, Diana, nice outfit. Oh, this whole brag, that sort of thing. And, when I was introduced to the litany of humility, it was hard for me to even pray it sincerely, even attempt that others may be loved more than I. Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it. I'm like, what? No, I don't want others to, I want to be the favorite. Pick me. So, but anyway, but remembering that we are dust does require humility. And like Father was just saying, it's like it's the starting point, the essential human virtue that we have to learn in order to walk closely with the Lord. And then, one of the parts that touched me also was this business of bending down. That just resonated so deeply with me. Oh God, who bend down when we humble ourselves is the prayer that he prays over the ashes for Ash Wednesday. Who bend down, and just to stop and think of that, like some of you have already shared how much it means to you, the God of the universe, Christ the King, Lord of history, bends down to me, you know, when we humble ourselves. And then Father said, and like it occurred to me, like we draw him down. It's like he said, we can't help but draw God down to us. It's mind-blowing. So, to understand who I am and who God is humility. And I really loved how they described it in the chapter. So I'm going to read it here. To abdicate pretensions to omnipotence. Standing before God in this way, I profess that I am not God. I accept the uncomfortable otherness of God. He is what I am not, yet my being bears his mark. I crave a completion that no created thing can give. I feel like that's a perfect definition of humility. And I also love the part where they're talking about in the book that and Father mentioned this too, that when he says, remember that you are dust and unto dust you shall return. It's not a condemnation, but it is just a statement of fact. Adam, he yielded to presumption. He thought he subsisted at God's level, but some quality, he had some quality intrinsic to himself. And he forgot that his spiritual nature was given to him by grace. And so by breaking that bond of trust that enabled his spiritual being, he forfeited his likeness to God, and he stands reduced to just his nature. So, in other words, with that saying, if we don't have God, we're just dust. We are dust, and dust is what he is, and dust is what we are apart from God. And so, but then when we remember we're dust, we realize that we're destined to be more. And in the book he says we are dust called to glory, and I love that. I think, yeah, that's good. And it reminded me of, all right, the Lion King, okay, and James Earl Jones, which I don't have his voice, but Simba is having a dream of Mufasa, and Mufasa in James Earl Jones' voice says, you have been created to be more than you have become. Remember, he says, and I'm like, yeah, who knew that would come from Disney? But it's theological. But our humility calls on God's inclination to bend down, touch, and reform us. So, my struggle with humility, when I was young, I thought to myself, like I didn't get humility at all. So I would think, well, I'm the one who studied for this test. It wasn't God that gave me an A. I was the one that did the hard work, and that was just immaturity, completely ignoring the fact that God gave me a brain, intelligence, parents who valued, studies and all that kind of stuff to do my best in school. When I got to college, it became evident that there were a whole lot of people that were way smarter than me. And I think that was maybe the beginning of my journey towards humility. I had a pretty high opinion of myself and my abilities. So, like a loving father, God had to teach me in ways gentle and not so gentle about humility. I loved when Father said in his homily about the carrot and the stick. So I preferred the carrot, but I usually needed the stick. And the greatest tragedy for me or for any of us here would be for everything to go the way that we planned. I would never have learned and never remembered that all is gift. All is gift from God's hand, the good and the bad. In his great mercy, God led me to a holy abbot, practically, like at Loyola, it was Abbot Clement Zelesnik. And so I'd go to him for spiritual guidance, and he'd say, Diana, what is your stance before God? And as usual, with all the things that the abbot said, I didn't understand really what he was asking me at first or what he was getting at. But I began to look at my life, and I saw that often my stance was not one of humility. Often it was a stance of ingratitude or sulkiness or, like that, whatever that is, I don't know. Not humility. But gradually, by his grace and mercy, it's become one of surrender, more like this, ready to receive what he gives me. And, we're all on this journey, because sometimes I'm not standing this way. So, another example I want to share about humility, more involves my husband, Mike. He told me I could say this, so yes, he did. He recently received an unwelcome diagnosis, let's just say, on Good Friday, which I thought was providential. The neurologist came in to talk to us, and he has this diagnosis of Parkinson's. And so I was a little bit in shock, I didn't expect to hear this. He has a progressive disease. It can be managed, but not cured. We don't know how fast it's going to progress or what it's going to look like. It's individual for everybody. So as we're processing this information, I felt a little bit panicked in the moment, but Mike wasn't. He was calm. He was just like, well, it is what it is, And I never heard a why me or sensed anything other than just resignation to God's will. And not grudging resignation either, just acceptance. And so his attitude helped me to be grounded and to remember, but wait, this is God's will for us, and God is a good, good father. I had to remember that. I had to consciously call that to my memory. He loves Mike. He loves me. He's going to walk through this with us. And, and then Mike also said to me, I got a lot of people I can offer this up for. He mentioned Peg. He said, I want to be like Peg D. And, so his whole attitude is one of humble acceptance. And, and that's humbling for me, and it's inspiring for me. And it teaches me, in the chapter, it says, to return to where we came from may require all of our strength. Humility is not a coward's virtue. Its beatitude is found through an abandonment in faith that touches the heroic. And I guess I'd agree with that. Another thing that spoke to me in this chapter is when the author talks about, I'm just going to call him the poet, Dagerman, and I feel like he was a nihilist, somebody who, like Father was talking about, this guy, he denied the existence of moral truth, and asserts the ultimate meaningless of life, morality, knowledge, and truth. And he also says that man's need for comfort can never be met. And then, like Father mentioned, he ended up taking his own life. And, I was thinking that I think that's what afflicts many younger people today. I think, Jackie, you were saying that. Um, you know, they don't know. They don't know who they are. They don't know whose they are. They don't know that they're loved. They don't know that they were created by love, for love. And I think that, you know, this is all of our condition to varying degrees. I used to struggle myself with this. Not that I knew God loved me, okay, but I didn't think he liked me very much. You know, I knew he loved me because he loved everybody, you know, so I was sort of like one of this great blob of people that God loved, but it didn't feel personal, you know. I struggle with the thought that God delights in me, or, you know, in my mind, that translate to he likes me. And as an individual, you know, and I feel like at the root of that was fear, fear that he doesn't love me just the way I am. Um, and, you know, in my life, I feel like I fell into the trap of proving myself to God. You know, look at me, God, I'm doing all the things, you know, and that wasn't even on a conscious level, you know, that was just how I dealt with it, you know, and it wasn't until, you know, like years of prayer, you know, spiritual guidance and all that, you know, growing in humility, you know, that he really enabled me to accept and trust the love that he freely gives me. And what a burden lifted that is. Um, you know, so, but, you know, I'm not a philosopher or anything like that, but I think that percolating under the nihilism that we see so much today in young people, is like fear, you know, fear that we're not loved, fear that our lives are meaningless, fear that God is not real, um, fear that after we die, we're just worm food. I guess, you know, we each have our own fear. But then again, in First John, perfect love casts out fear. So, you know, the antidote to that, the cure for that is like Father said, looking at Jesus. Um, you know, so I wanted to share a little bit about the fear of death. You know, I've heard that that's like the ultimate fear. And I don't know if it's my ultimate fear right at this moment, but, you know, I'm getting older and I think about it. Um, but I remember my mom, you know, she died 2 years ago tomorrow. And she was 92 and she was a beautiful, loving soul. And she loved God and her family and her neighbors. But I know she was afraid of dying, you know. I don't know if she was afraid of the process, you know, like if there was going to be suffering involved, all that. She wasn't one to talk openly about these things, but yet it was evident, you know, we would talk about it, Mike and I, yeah, you know. But so it's praying to Saint Joseph a lot, you know, and all that, just because, but anyway, you know, God in his mercy, you know, he showed his love and fidelity to my mom because she died a holy death, you know, and she was healthy up until like, well, pretty healthy. I mean, we could see she was declining in the months preceding, but she was healthy up until, you know, she was sick for like less than a week before she went. And 2 nights before she fell ill, she and my brother walked around the block. So she was doing okay. Um, but then we thought she might have had a little stroke because her responses were delayed and she just wasn't acting like herself and all that. And she couldn't seem to find the right words she wanted to say. So I took her to the hospital and we waited like for 6 hours in the emergency room. And she had this little throwaway phrase that she always would say, you know, as she was talking, and she, you know, kind of like as a space holder, she'd say, well, as I said, you know, and so when we finally got into this cubicle in the ER, she was sitting there on the gurney and they were getting ready to take her for an MRI. And she just had this little smile on her face and she said, well, as I said, and then that